Hey guys, Ramsey here. Welcome to another video. Today we have a full review, and it's a review of actually one of my favorite fragrances of all time. And it's a sad day and a happy day. Happy because we're reviewing such a beautiful scent. Sad because this is the final Papillon fragrance review for the channel until her newest fragrance comes out, which we'll talk a little bit about more at the end of the video. But today we're reviewing the one and only Anubis. Now, Papillon's Anubis is the first fragrance that Liz Moore's ever created. It was actually one of her earliest fragrances for the House of Papillon, and I think it caught fire in a way that she was actually almost worried about, that she would never be able to follow up the lightning in a bottle reception that Papillon's Anubis got whenever it came out. Many critically acclaimed reviewers and influencers at the time really started to hype it up, and whenever she did the interview with me, which I would urge every single one of you to go to my playlist, find the interview playlist that I created, and just watch the interviews that I have on the channel. They are probably some of the best fragrance content that you can find. Liz Moore's interview was fantastic, and she agreed after Epona comes out to come on the channel for a part 2, which I cannot wait for. But Anubis was actually so good and so well received that she thought, did I just get lucky? Was it a fluke? Am I kidding myself thinking I could actually have a perfume brand with more than maybe just one lucky lightning in a bottle? Will I be able to carry on the greatness of Anubis to the next generation of Papillon perfume? So let me give you a little bit of a quote, but first I have to read you the notes. There is a blurb. I don't know if she wrote it or Lucky Scent wrote it or what, but it says that Anubis puts you in a cocoon of almost a sarcophagus of suede, jasmine, pink lotus, immortelle, olivana, myrrh, and saffron. And for those of you that don't know, Anubis is a deity, a vintage god from old Egypt. And one thing that I have to say while I'm thinking about it is nothing smells like Anubis. I have never smelled a fragrance in all of my journeys that smells like Anubis, period. I've smelled what feels like thousands of perfumes. Maybe you could, if you really twisted your brain, you could maybe see something like Arquiste Nanban in the same realm. I reviewed Nanban on the channel, but man, nothing really comes close to what Anubis is or does, not on my skin. So let me read you a blurb from Liz Moore's. So obviously Anubis is the god of the afterlife. We'll talk a little bit about the Egyptian god that inspired this fragrance, but here is a direct quote from Liz Moore's. Anubis began life as a signature scent for myself. I have always been drawn to dark, leathery scents, me too, and the metamorphosis of Anubis from personal sketch to final product has been considerable. It was nameless until it was completed, and it was then that I realized my obsession with ancient Egypt had subconsciously manifested itself. The initial materials used, synonymous with mummification, have now been sweetened into a dark but delicious fragrance. After many reincarnations, Anubis was born, literally reborn after being mummified. Beautiful write-up, beautiful fragrance of what they say heady blooms of jasmine, rich suede and ambers, and smoldering over this incense-laden base of frankincense, sandalwood, and labdanum. Okay, so let us talk a little bit about sort of the god that this is named after. So if you guys are not familiar, Anubis is the god of funeral practices, or in ancient Egypt, mummification, the god of the dead, basically, if you will. And so you would expect there to be kind of the... so if you look at Anubis's face, by the way, he is a jackal, and there's a reason for that, but the face is always black. And the black face represents many things, but in this fragrance, it's sort of represented by this darkness, which tends to come out, which we'll talk a little bit about. But if you think about it, just from a modern brain standpoint, right, you're burying people in Egypt in these shallow graves, obviously, when they pass away. And obviously the jackals around the countryside were always seen around the cemetery. So it makes sense that the people would kind of put two and two together and say, hey, that's the god of the dead. Maybe they were just trying to get a quick meal. I have no clue. But like I said, we probably say the jackals were just hungry and scavenging nowadays, but back then they took everything as a sign from God, and so they saw this jackal Anubis as the protector of the dead and especially of mummification. So Anubis, when you first spray, and I've got about a half hour dry down. By the way, just to show you, this is one of the thickest niche fragrances I've ever come across. And in my interview with Liz Moores, she mentioned, and this is where I really think value for money comes in. She mentioned that this is sold as an eau de parfum, okay? But it's like 1% away from an extrait, okay? So while all these other houses are falling over themselves to issue an extrait because they can then double the price, she could easily call this an extrait, just increase the fragrance oil by this much, call it an extrait, and double the price from 205 to 450 or whatever it is. Easily she could do it. And you know what? People would buy it. But that's not the kind of person that Liz Moores is, just from talking to her. She didn't want to do that. In fact, she wanted to do the opposite. She wanted to keep it as an eau de parfum so that it would be less expensive. It would be sold as less expensive and more people could explore her work. How beautiful is that? In today's world where there are literally vultures everywhere trying to squeeze every drop, every dime out of people, every drop of blood from the stone that they can get. She's going the opposite direction. So I really applaud her work, and that's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons, most importantly, the smell and the quality of the ingredients and her blending and all that stuff. But one of the most important reasons I really trust Liz Moores is examples like this come up. Examples like this come up over and over when talking with her, that she really is trying to do the right thing and for artistic sake, not just for profit's sake. Obviously, you have to make money. The point of a business is to stay in business, but she goes beyond, and I really appreciate her for that. So this wears like an extrait, even though it's listed as an eau de parfum. Like I said, it's like one dry. She basically said it's like right on the line. So this was over half an hour ago. This was maybe 40 minutes ago I sprayed this. Look at this. That is absolutely insane how thick. And that just shows the quality of materials that she's using. She put it this way in our live stream. You get big bang for your buck with Anubis, okay? There's no doubt about that. So when you spray it, it opens up with basically what you're going to smell are these very sticky resins that smell both gummy and burnt at the same time. So imagine this sort of gummy resinous feel that will give you this direct comparison to the black burnt look. For the very first time you set eyes upon Anubis's black head, you get this burnt incense-like offering that kind of hits you. And what's crazy is late into the dry down, I'm talking 10 to 12 hours later, which I have right here and you can still smell. This is a very, very long fragrance. 10 to 12 hours in, it almost leaves me with this image. So you go opening to late dry down. The ultra late dry down is going to leave you with this image of what I must have imagined the city of Alexandria must have smelled like when the Ptolemies were on the throne, or when they made Alexander a god, or when Ramesses II was in power with his 130 plus wives. God bless him. But just imagine like an entire year's worth of incense being burned for one ceremony, right? Imagine taking an entire year's worth of incense and burning it at once. And that feeling of what it must have smelled like in the air, right? But not just incense, the highest quality myrrh you could imagine. So a lot of my friends have been on this myrrh kick. Imagine myrrh and kefi kind of come together. And the late dry down, one of the best representations of how I would imagine a pharaoh sitting in your palace, looking out at your city, at your people, and after one of these monumental ceremonies, just smelling what the air must have smelled like, the electricity in the air from all the people coming out to see you. Or, if you take the god Anubis literally, maybe it was at your own funeral, and will have smelled like if you were considered a living god and you died, right? Imagine the sacrifice they would have made for burning incense and stuff like myrrh, right? So the myrrh gives the fragrance this earthy-like effect, but that after effect comes a little bit later. The opening smells of kind of freshly lit incense, almost like the incense was freshly lit on the burner, and almost like you're smelling an inside of a temple. There's almost like this enclosed feeling to me. Anubis is one of those fragrances that, one of the reasons why I waited until the end to review Anubis when it was her first creation, and I reviewed everything else. I reviewed the Dryads, the Spell 125s, which also has an Egyptian reference. The Salome's, I reviewed all of them. Tobacco Rose, which is next on my to buy list, and of course Epona, which is coming up next, her next fragrance. But I think every single one of her offerings is full bottle worthy. I have yet to come across a offering from this house which is not considered to me to be full bottle worthy. So you have that freshly lit incense and this enclosed feeling, okay? And one of the reasons why I waited is because to review this, and I've sat with this fragrance now for over 2 years, okay? So 2 years plus I've been kind of wearing this occasionally, and you can see you do not need much. It doesn't take very much of this fragrance to fill a room and last forever on your skin. So this fragrance is one of the fragrances that changes the most with the weather that I've ever come across, ever. So the fragrance basically is very hard to wrap your brain and your hands around, because what happens with this fragrance is the jasmine in here, which is of the Egyptian variety, because everything is supposed to be kind of tied together. And to my understanding, which I can't sit here and tell you I've smelled proper Egyptian jasmine, because I haven't and I don't know what that smells like, but from the research that I've done, and the jasmine in this fragrance, Egyptian jasmine is undeniably slightly sweeter, okay, than the normal jasmine fragrances you would smell. Like, for example, I've got some actual jasmine sambac right here, and I've got some jasmine grandiflorum right here. And the Egyptian jasmine is much sweeter than either of these two. It almost feels like a more sweetened version of the grandiflorum. Yeah, the grandiflorum has some of those honeyed aspects, but the honeyed aspects you get in this fragrance comes from something else, which we'll talk about later on, okay? But so the two most popular types of jasmine, the sambac and the grandiflorum, are not what's used in here. What's used is this Egyptian jasmine, which I think is supposed to be slightly sweeter, but also it can give off a little bit of green touches. And it's the only, to me, it's one of the only things that feels real green in here, is the green touches that you get from the Egyptian jasmine. Maybe you could make the case of there being a little bit of oak moss in here that's not listed in the base, but that would just be me. That would really just be me guessing. So, but what ends up happening, and the reason the jasmine is so important to kind of focus on in this review, is because what ends up happening is the jasmine becomes much more evident in the heat. I'm talking about like taking the lead versus being way in the back of the train. So in the heat, the jasmine pops off of my skin in a way that I would say is almost like unexpected. It almost adds this layer of tenacious, sweetened floral jasmine in the top of the fragrance, especially the first 10, 15, 20 minutes or so. While in the cold, the jasmine acts like how the air would smell if you were just near a jasmine bush. Have you ever been standing next to a jasmine bush and you just kind of get little wafts of jasmine in the air? Your face is not stuck into the bush. You're just kind of getting wafts of it in the air as you're maybe walking by or something, and there's a jasmine bush off in the corner. And so it recedes more into the background in the cold, and it literally has that feeling of smelling fresh jasmine flowers in the air, okay? Whereas in the heat, it is really prominent, and it really almost takes the lead. So if you go to the fragrance in the cold, which is, I think most people consider this a cold weather fragrance, imagine the air filled with those ceremonial kind of resins I mentioned earlier, frankincense and myrrh and saffron and this gummy resins, and just ever so delicately mixing it with the jasmine in the air. That's how I think most people who wear this fragrance in the cold will picture it. I picture it like a beautiful woman just strolls by your throne, because again, you're Pharaoh in this story, okay? A beautiful woman strolls by your throne, and she has like jasmine flowers placed in her hair. But in the meantime, there's all of these resins and smoke and gummy resins, earthiness of myrrh, and all that stuff kind of coming in. The slight fungal quality of myrrh makes an appearance from time to time. And this jasmine, this beautiful woman with jasmine flowers in her hair walks by, and you just get a little whiff of it, It's not what you're focusing on. Well, maybe it is what you're focusing on, but your nose is focusing on all of the other things in this enclosed space, right? The smoke feels enclosed. The jasmine's not the focal point. The sticky resins in the smoke and the freshly lit smelling incense that smell. The incense in here, whether you're smelling it in the heat or the cold, smells slightly similar to my nose. It smells like you're getting freshly lit incense and black incense, okay? Like there's a little bit of a burnt, ashy, smoky quality to it, but also mixed with the freshly lit sort of, if you've ever seen actual frankincense, it has a fresher, lemony-like smell before it's lit. But one of the crazy things about this fragrance is how she managed to create this smell that it almost feels like all of this smoke is like suspended in the air, right? So imagine smelling air filled with all of this celebratory kind of incense, right? And resins, and how heavy the air must have smelled, right? Just imagine my example of burning a year's worth of incense in a day, okay? A celebratory day. And what the air must have smelled like in Alexandria at the time. I don't think I've ever smelled a fragrance that so perfectly encapsulates that feeling to me. That feeling of celebration in ancient times, though. Okay, this is how it must have been to be at one of those ceremonies. And I think the second ingredient, outside of the jasmine kind of changing a little bit in the heat, I think the second ingredient that changes a little bit more warm versus cold weather is the saffron. The saffron really pops off my skin a little bit more in the heat, and it adds a little bit of that chemical, like sand-like smell, and saffron makes the fragrance feel even thicker. So I have gone away from seasons in my way of wearing perfume now, and in this fragrance is actually one of the reasons that really convinced me of that, because I remember, and it was pure happenstance. It was an accident. It wasn't an accident. It was I wore it on purpose, but the timing was an accident, because when Liz Moores came on the channel last, maybe almost 2 years ago now, it's been a while, but I wore this, and it must have been coming up on 2 years here in the summer. So it was probably like a year and 7 or 8 months ago now, right? But when she came on the channel, it was hot as hell here in Texas. And I remember wearing this in Texas and thinking, my God, like I've only been wearing this in the cold. I'm missing out on parts of this fragrance. Like I'm not getting the full picture of the scent. And then when Liz Moores came on, either, I don't remember if it was just us talking backstage or if she said it on the live stream, but she mentioned how much she loves wearing Anubis in the heat, that the heat actually changes the structure of the fragrance a little bit. And I think the saffron and the way that the jasmine changes in the heat adds this unbelievable kind of depth to the composition. And here I think it acts like this time machine, just like transporting us back to long ago and helping to recreate that heavy Egyptian ceremony feel that I was describing earlier. Now, whether that ceremony is a celebration of life or death, I don't know. But it definitely has this celebratory feel. Now, we get to the heart of the fragrance, which really, for me, all of what I've described so far, this would still be an amazing fragrance, and I would still tell you to buy it. But in the heart of Anubis sits this, one of my favorite particular versions of this accord, okay? And somehow the composition will get to a point. I think it's a little different on everyone's skin, but like I'm getting it now clear as day, and it's 45 minutes in. Sometimes it may take an hour or two to really see this whole picture come together, okay? But what very evidently happens is this suede accord at some point will make its appearance, okay? And the accord just absolutely shines. I mean, it isn't leather per se. You all know I'm a huge leather fan. In fact, if you said, Ramsey, you can only wear one type of fragrance for the rest of your life, it would be leather fragrances. There would be no doubt about that. And I'm sure that the Egyptians were skilled leather makers. I don't know that, but I'm guessing. But suede was invented in the 1800s, so this suede accord that ends up coming through, you can't tie back to Egypt. But if you are a leather lover like me, this is one of those fragrances that is almost like a reference suede fragrance to me. Like if you said, Ramsey, show me a suede fragrance. Show me a fragrance that brings out that suede accord, because a suede accord is different than a leather accord. One of my all-time favorite suede, which maybe I'll do a This Is Not a Top 10 Suede video. That is a very under appreciated note in perfumery. But one of my all-time favorites is actually a discontinued fragrance. It's Gianfranco Ferre by the house, well, it's Gianfranco Ferre Pontaccio 21 by the house of Gianfranco Ferre. And you can see it has a leather like kind of outer crocodile snakeskin wrapper, but it's a suede accord in here. I love this stuff. I think I am going to do it. This is not a top 10 suede video. But this is going to be very close to the top, if not the top. I don't know how I could pick another suede that would take this off. If you have never smelled a suede accord, a proper suede accord before, just picture, this. I just imagine this pharaoh like from ancient times being shown this modern suede accord. Like imagine like taking a pharaoh and showing him like a suede steering wheel. Have you ever held like a suede steering wheel in like a high-end Cadillac or BMW? They feel amazing, by the way. I never got one because I was worried it would get dirty, which I still think it will. But clean, they are absolutely amazing. Suede, if you've never smelled it, basically smells like, it smells like you're taking like leather, like the best parts of leather and the best parts of silk, and like putting it together and in just this ultra smooth, posh suede. Velvety smooth is a good word for it. Just this velvety smooth feeling. I imagine the old man in Coming to America saying, "What is that, velvet?" There's definitely this velvety-like feel, okay? So I just imagine our pharaoh like walking into his ceremony wearing like a suede onesie because he's like stoned to bejesus on whatever the hell the pharaohs would get high on back in the day, and just all this expensive incense and resins being burnt in his honor. And since he's just so stoned, all he wants to do is just touch his suede onesie. That there's just this crazy image in my head every time I wear this, of this high as a kite pharaoh. He cannot stop touching himself because he's wearing this amazing suede onesie. But this stuff is absolutely phenomenal. The suede accord in here is outstanding. I don't know how you could improve on it. Honestly, I have no clue. It is pure perfection. So, two final notes that I think show Liz Moore's genius when kind of creating this fragrance. One is how much thought she put into the craft of the pink lotus note. So in ancient times, the lotus flower was revered and almost like worshipped as like this symbol of creation, if you will. So much so that it's actually still the national flower of Egypt to this day. And the Egyptian lotus from back in the day was not the pink lotus that she used in here. It was actually white lotus. So Liz decided to use pink lotus here for whatever reason, okay? But it adds this intensely sweet floral aroma that feels very waxy in nature. And that waxy nature of the pink lotus accord, I think, blends brilliantly with the resinous, waxy, balmy nature of the myrrh and incense kind of combining together. And pink lotus, or just the lotus in general, is celebrated and thought of as a flower for spiritual growth, okay? So it ties in perfectly with the Anubis god association, right? Spiritual beings. And then finally, the second note, which really shows Liz Moore's, I think, ability to weave a picture, to put together a tapestry of scent, is this immortelle note, which she decided to use in here. So let me read you this very interesting kind of quote that I came across. It says, "Immortelle has become a staple flower not only in our generation, but also in the generation of Egyptians, Romans, and ancient Greeks. These ancient civilizations would use wreaths made from immortelle flowers as offerings to the gods. Their handmade wreaths would be draped over stone statues and left as a symbol of the sun and gold. Immortelle is an everlasting flower." Sometimes you'll literally hear it referred to as everlasting flower, which means its flowers never wilt. You can easily create a wreath or bouquet using immortelle flowers, and they will dry and hold their gold color without ever wilting. This is probably one of the reasons why our ancient ancestors used these flowers for decorations. But is it possible this was also a symbol of everlasting life? Okay, so, we're talking about gods, we're talking about death, we're talking about mummification, we're talking about everlasting life. And immortelle, you can see, is used as a symbol of that, even in ancient times, even in ancient Egyptian times. So Some people claim, if you've never smelled Immortelle, that it gives them like this weird curry-like smell, okay? And in some fragrances, I can see that, okay? Here, I get none of that weird curry-like smell. Somehow, Liz Moore's kind of managed to tease out the golden honeyed, almost like burnt straw, golden honey, dripping honeyed floral-like smell that Immortelle has in a way that is just perfect for this composition. And so the closest, if you just want to isolate that Immortelle Accord, not the smell of the fragrance overall, so don't go saying Ramsey said this smells like that. But if you just took the Immortelle note in isolation, I think Sunshine Man by Amouage would be the fragrance that I think used very similar, Immortelle in a similar way in the composition, okay? One of my favorite Amouage is on the to review list very soon, hopefully. So basically, in closing, what I would say is that for me, I don't think I've ever found, very rarely have I come across a fragrance that so transports me. Okay, this is a straight time machine to ancient Egypt for me, and it places you square in the Pharaoh seat as well. Well, at least in my version of the story, it does. So you get that from the top with that sappy, gummy, resinous kind of opening. That literally smells like the resins being placed on the burner plates and being burned in your honor. To how the fragrance progresses depending on the weather, with the jasmine or the pink lotus or the saffron kind of taking the lead or staying behind, to the final dry down that just feels like a year's worth of incense being burned in one city and in one day in your honor to celebrate either triumph or to celebrate your death, whether you were to be mummified or live on forever with Anubis watching your back, however you want to tell the story. I cannot think of a better fragrance to represent Egypt and represent the house of Papillon. If you have never smelled a Papillon, this is the one I would urge you to start with, her very first one. Even though I think it's one of the most complex fragrances and one of the ones that you will not wrap your head around in one or two wearings because you have to wear it in different seasons. But like I said, if you are looking for a Papillon fragrance to get into, I don't know if you can start with one that is a better representation of the house. I would tell you to start with this or Salome. Salome has a little bit of this sexualized, sweaty, dirty, cuminy, civet-like note, which some people may be put off by. I love those type of fragrances. In our interview, Liz Moores literally says it's her interpretation of sex on the skin. So if you're into, slightly dirty, animalic fragrances, Salome is one I'd recommend. If you're into resinous fragrances or myrrh, labdanums, incense, all of that stuff, this is the one that I would recommend. And again, that suede accord probably would be number one when I do my ranking. I don't know. But finally, that brings us back to the point where I started with in the beginning. It's a sad day and a happy day. Happy because I'm finally getting to review one of what I think is just pure brilliance. And sad because it's the final review from the house. Luckily for us, we will only have to wait a couple more months before Epona is finally released. I cannot wait to discuss Epona with you guys. I've been sitting on this for well over a month. Liz Moore's told me, don't put out the video until it is officially dropped. And I said, yes, ma'am. But I cannot wait to talk about Epona for you guys. And I cannot wait to have Liz Moore's on for part 2 of the Liz Moore's interview. So I'm chomping at the bit for those. So if you have experience with Anubis or the House of Papillon just in general, do let me know. Let me know your thoughts. Love the interaction with you guys. Love the feedback. Leave a comment if you can. Just even if you were just here to say, hey, I watched, thanks for watching. I love the interactions and the comments and the back and forth with the community. Thank you to everyone who has kind of stood by me in support over these last 2.5 years. It's been amazing 2.5 years. I've loved doing these reviews, and the fire does not go out in the ram's eyes. There's a lot more to come, a lot more fragrances to discuss. And, hopefully this is much closer to the beginning than the end of the channel. So as always, thank you for watching. Cheers, guys. And I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.